Don't you recognize me, cowboy? A confession that shook the West silent. Out here in the dry, battered land, where dust swallows every hoofprint, a story rose that made an entire town hold its breath. An Apache woman, thin, scarred, barely holding on, suddenly appeared at the gates of a ranch. The townsfolk looked at her like she was a curse. But him, a brooding cowboy haunted by loss, he froze where he stood. Then, cutting through the air like a blade, her words struck. "Don't you recognize me, cowboy? I'm your childhood love." That single line didn't just summon an old memory. It set the stage for a chain of choices where prejudice, love, and death twisted together. Will the cowboy turn his back, or step across the line the whole town despises? The sun sank behind the far-off ridges, dragging a red haze across the evening sky. The little town lay still, as if land and man alike were holding their breath against the West's merciless air. The main road was nothing but dirt and sand, wind kicking grit into every crack. The tin roofs creaked with rust, hinges groaned on weather-worn doors, and the sparse beat of horse hooves echoed like a memory fading. The wooden buildings, thrown up in haste years ago, now stood gray, cracked, and tired, much like the people who lived in their shadows, wary, worn, quick to suspicion. At the far end of that street, a figure staggered into sight. Ayanna. Apache-born, barely past 20, though her face carried lines of suffering that made her seem older. Her steps dragged, her frame draped in a torn dress. Dark stains of dried blood crusted along her shoulder and ribs. Each breath rattled through cracked lips, but her back stayed straight, her eyes still lit with a hard flame, the last thing left unbroken after days of running, starving, and bleeding across the land. The townsfolk spotted her quick enough. From the saloon porch, cowboys paused mid-drag, squinting, smoke curling from their lips. At the general store, the shopkeeper yanked her child inside, shutting the door fast, as if one glance from the Apache woman spelled trouble. Whispers carried through cracks in shutters. Apache. One of them. She knew that look. She knew that weight. In every pair of eyes, she saw the old scars her people carried. Memories of raids, of blood spilled. Memories she herself had no hand in, yet bore the punishment for all the same. Ayanna understood well. Each step deeper into town was a gamble with her life. But behind her lay nothing but slow death on the prairie. Hunger, thirst, solitude. To turn back was to lie down in the dust forever. To step forward meant at least a spark of hope. So she whispered to herself with every dragging footfall, "This isn't surrender. This is the choice to live." The last gusts of daylight rolled dust across the road, but through the haze she saw it. A broken fence line, a small horse pen, a gate hammered together from scraps of wood. A place she remembered. Memory struck her chest. A fire by the ranch house. A boy with gentle eyes handing her a piece of warm bread in exchange for wild berries she'd picked by the creek. A childhood moment, simple, fleeting, that had outlived the years of exile and hunger. She had carried that memory like a stone in her heart, and tonight, it had led her back. The town watched in silence as she passed, every glance cut like a knife. But Ayanna did not stop. Her body trembled, her wounds burned, yet she pressed on toward that gate of memory. She knew well. This was the last threshold. Beyond it waited either life or death. And there it was, the Dawson Ranch, bathed in the fading light. The fence sagged, the small stable half collapsed, the yard tracked by animals, familiar as a scar. Childhood carved into timber and dirt. She had once laughed here, once shared fruit and bread with a white boy who never looked at her as other. Skin, blood, tribe, none of it mattered then. Only friendship, only a smile. But tonight she returned not as the carefree girl she once was, but as a scarred woman, broken and hunted, with the whole world set against her. Behind the house, Cole Dawson was hammering a board back onto the stall. A cowboy in his 30s, broad-shouldered, shirt worn thin and stained with sweat. His face was hard, tanned, weathered by loss. A man shaped by silence and grief. A brother buried in Kansas, a job lost to violence, a youth wasted on nameless trails. 2 years he'd been here, building this little ranch as a refuge, a place to hide from the noise of the world. Then came the sound of footsteps in the sand. Cole looked up and froze. A woman stood at his gate. Dress in tatters, blood dried at her side. Apache features marked plain as day. The one thing this town feared most. For an instant, instinct told him to turn away, to act like he hadn't seen. Strangers bearing trouble were no rarity in his life. But then she raised her face and her eyes. Eyes he knew. Eyes that dragged old memories from the depths of his chest, robbing him of breath. Her voice broke the space between them, low and steady, cutting through like iron. "Don't you recognize me, cowboy? I'm your childhood love," said the Apache beauty. The words split the silence like a knife. Cole stood motionless. For years he'd locked those memories away, refused to let them touch him. Yet here they stood, flesh and blood, scarred and proud, staring him down. His chest pounded, caught between the instinct to protect his hard-won quiet and the truth that a piece of his youth had always belonged to her. The air turned heavy. Dust rolled across the yard. A horse nickered in the pen, as if it too sensed the weight of the moment. Ayanna stood straight, her body trembling but her eyes fierce, unyielding. She knew, if Cole turned away, this last gate would close forever. So whose side would you choose? A. Ayanna, the Apache woman fighting to hold on to life. B. Cole Dawson, the weary cowboy chained to old memories. Or would you choose another path? Drop a comment and let me know you're still riding with this story. Cole stood rigid by the fence, fingers tightening unconsciously around the hammer still smelling of pine. Inside him, a war raged. One part wanted to turn away, slam the gate shut, pretend he hadn't seen her at all. An Apache woman wandering into his yard was no different than striking a match over a powder keg. The whole town was ready to blow with prejudice. They would question, they would pry, they would track his every step. And when that happened, all his efforts to keep a quiet life, far from trouble, would crumble to dust. But those eyes, the same eyes he'd known when they were children by the creek, no longer clear and bright, but shadowed with exhaustion and pain. And yet, beneath it all, Cole still caught the flame, stubborn, unyielding. His chest softened. He knew damn well, if he turned his back now, she would collapse out there, left for the merciless desert to finish. A dry gust howled through, rolling dust across the yard. Cole let out a long breath, heavy as iron. He lowered the hammer, slid the latch, and pushed the gate open. The small gesture sounded loud as thunder, tearing the line between past and present. No greeting, no promise. Just a space wide enough for her to walk through. Ayanna stumbled inside, legs trembling, close to giving out. Relief flickered in her eyes, but so did caution. Inside the small house, a lantern burned low, casting weak light over the rough-hewn table. On it lay crumbs of cornbread, the last of Cole's supper. He pushed the plate toward her, voice low and rasped but firm. "Eat." There was no poetry in it, only heavy silence. Ayanna looked at the bread, then at Cole. Her hands shook as she reached out, tearing off small pieces as though they might be snatched away. Each slow bite tasted like salvation after days of starving. Cole sat opposite, elbows on his knees, eyes steady on her every move. Deep inside, a thin thread of trust stretched taut again. Not full trust. Not yet. But the first fragile step for two souls bound by childhood to meet again in this dangerous present. Outside, the desert wind howled. Inside, a different silence settled. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of something beginning. Ayanna had only eaten a few bites before she faltered. She leaned slightly, hand pressed against her side, where the fabric was stiff with dried blood. The wound couldn't hide any longer. Cole's brow tightened. Before he could speak, Ayanna untied the small pouch at her hip, pulling out a bone needle, sinew thread, and scraps of cloth. Without a word, she stripped off the filthy bandage, exposing torn flesh and deep bruised red. A sight that would turn most away. But not her. She bit down hard, drew a breath, and drove the needle through her own skin. Blood welled, thick and dark, dripping onto the table, mixing with the oil lamp smoke. Cole froze, fingers curling tight around the hammer at his side. He had never seen anyone stitch themselves with such calm resolve. Each stitch was a cut between life and death, and she made it look like something she'd done 100 times before. Sweat rolled down her brow, dripping to her jaw, yet her eyes never wavered. The lantern light carved her face into sharp relief, a fierce beauty, no longer the playful girl at the creek. She was a woman forged in fire and blood, strong enough to chill a man's soul. Cole swallowed hard, breath caught. In that moment, truth struck him. Ayanna wasn't just a memory, not a ghost of his childhood. She was survival made flesh. She was the courage he himself had long since lost, and if he turned her out now, he'd be turning away from the last piece of bravery left in him. When she tied off the last knot, her hands trembled, but her eyes still burned bright. She wrapped the cloth around her waist, breathing hard, then lifted her gaze to his. In that look, no words were needed. Everything was already spoken. Cole set the hammer down on the table, his voice low and steady, like a vow carved in stone. No matter what this town thinks, I won't let you go. Outside, the desert wind still wailed, dust swirling against the sagging porches. But in that little room, an invisible cord drew two souls tight, not just by memory, but by a life or death choice in the here and now. So whose side would you choose? Oh, Ayanna, the Apache woman who stitched her own wounds to cling to life. B. Cole Dawson, the cowboy who chose to defy the town with his vow. Or is there another path? Leave a comment and let me know you're still riding with this story. News of Ayanna's arrival didn't take a full day to sweep through the town. Whispers slithered from the saloon to the general store, even outside the church doors. Folks said an Apache woman was hiding at Cole Dawson's ranch. The quiet cowboy who kept to himself, now dragging trouble straight to his gate. And the more the tale spread, the heavier the suspicious stares became. Out west, the Apache were a thorn that never healed, a memory of fire and blood still raw. By morning, Sheriff Morgan rode up to Cole's fence. He stopped at the gate, his weathered face shaded by a wide-brim hat, his eyes calm, though edged with caution. Cole stepped out, one hand resting on the strap of his holster. Morgan spoke slow, gravel in his voice, but steady. You know this town won't stand for it. An Apache under your roof takes only the slightest excuse and the whole place could blow. If they decide to move, I won't be able to hold order. Cole said nothing at first. His eyes flickered, but his answer was even. She's broken no law. Morgan gave a small nod, though his gaze carried a warning. Then he pulled the reins and rode off, leaving a trail of dust on the hard ground. By noon, more hoofbeats came. This time, not the law, but trouble. Two strangers reined up at the gate. Dust-worn coats, cold eyes sharp as knives, the kind of men who followed the scent of coin. Bounty hunters. The tall, lean one leaned forward, his tone rough and arrogant. Heard tell an Apache girl's holed up here. Prescott's got a warrant. Hand her over, and we ride out. Cole didn't move. He stood firm at the fence, eyes like ice. Inside the house, Ayanna's shadow flickered at the window, watching, waiting, her whole body tense. The second hunter stroked his thick beard, eyes narrowing at the house. There, that's her. Cole's hand wrapped tight around his gun grip, his voice dropping low, hard as forged steel. She's under my roof. That means she's mine to protect. Nobody takes her. The air thickened. One wrong twitch, and lead would fly. Both hunters shifted, hands brushing their holsters. And then, hoofbeats again, Sheriff Morgan returned, riding slow to the gate. One hand loose on the reins, the other already near his pistol. His voice came steady, carrying weight. Without official papers from Prescott, you've got no claim here. Law in this territory still runs through me. The two hunters exchanged glances, irritation flashing in their eyes. A heavy silence stretched. Then the tall one spat in the dirt, yanked his reins, and turned his horse. Hooves thundered as the pair rode off toward the main road, leaving only swirling dust behind. Morgan looked at Cole, half warning, half respect. He didn't speak, only tipped his head, then rode on. Cole stood still, chest easing by inches. Inside, Ayanna pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart hammer. In the blazing sunlight, Cole saw the truth clear. From this moment, he'd stood openly on her side, which meant the whole town now stood against him. That afternoon, the western sky shifted. A curtain of brown-gray clouds thickened, swallowing the light. Cole narrowed his eyes. He knew the signs well. A sandstorm was coming, the kind that could tear a town apart in one night. The first gusts whistled through the fence, carrying the bitter sting of dry earth. Ayanna stepped onto the porch, her hair and dress whipping wild. She recognized the threat instantly. Sandstorm spared no one. Apache or settler, it crushed all the same. Her eyes met Cole's. No words needed. Both knew they had to move. Cole sprinted to the yard, dragging out planks he'd kept ready. Ayanna followed close, ignoring the stab of her wounded side. Together they nailed boards across the windows, stuffed rags into the cracks. The wind roared, slamming against the wooden gate. Cole braced it with his shoulders, while Ayanna tied ropes fast from inside. Then the storm hit. The whole house shook, groaning like it might rip from the ground. Sand forced itself through every gap, swirling in the lamplight. Cole clutched the lantern, guarding the flame. Beside him, Ayanna pressed wet cloths against the door seams, hands trembling, eyes fierce. They weren't strangers anymore. They were fighters, side by side, against a common enemy. Through the screaming wind, Cole glanced at her. Hair wild, face streaked with dust, yet her eyes burned like fire. Fierce, proud. In that moment he knew, if Ayanna could stand this storm with him, there was no trial ahead that could tear them apart. Time seemed frozen in the endless howl. They sat close by the fire, listening to the roof strain and the walls creak. Ayanna clutched the cloth binding her ribs, pain sharp in every breath, but not a sound of complaint left her lips. Cole watched her in silence, and something hard inside him broke free. A decision, final and unshakable. This woman belonged to his home now, just as he belonged to her fate. Hours dragged. At last, the wind eased. Outside, the land lay buried under a thick veil of sand. But inside that wooden house, the fire still burned, and two souls sat unbroken. The storm had not carried away what they had built together: trust. If it were you, whose side would you take? A. Ayanna, the Apache woman who braved the storm with fierce resolve. B. Cole Dawson, the cowboy who held his ground, keeping both house and faith intact. Or would you choose another path? Leave a comment and let me know you're still riding with this story. The sandstorm had just passed, leaving the town cloaked in a gray film of dust. Folks quietly set to mending what was broken: collapsed porches, fences leaning crooked. Everyone was bone-tired, yet all eyes drifted one way, toward Cole Dawson's ranch. The man they now whispered about as the fool who invited trouble under his roof. Suspicion hadn't yet settled when a scream tore the silence. It came from the church. A woman's cry, raw and frantic. Her 6-year-old boy had fallen through the rotten boards of the old well behind the church. Townsfolk rushed in, circling the black mouth of the pit. Someone dragged out a rope, but it was too short. No one dared climb down that slick, narrow hole. The mother clawed at the stones till her hands bled, sobbing, while the boy's faint whimpers rose up from the darkness. Ayanna was there. The moment she stepped to the edge of the crowd, sharp, hateful stares cut her way. Murmurs hissed. "Apache, stay out. This ain't your business." But she didn't hear them. She saw only the boy, clinging to life, and in that sight, old memories struck. The children of her kin, driven off by soldiers, their cries echoing through the night. Without hesitation, she shoved through the circle, dropped to her knees at the well's rim, and barked out, "Give me the rope! Now!" The crowd faltered. Voices rose to object, until Cole pushed in, his voice like iron. "Do as she says." In moments the rope was looped and cinched tight around Ayanna's waist. Cole tied the last knot himself, his hand trembling slightly, though his gaze was firm. He leaned close, murmuring for her alone. "Careful. I've got you." Before anyone could argue, Ayanna plunged into the dark. The rope stretched taut, lowering her down. The air was cold and damp, stone scraping her arms. She kept moving, inch by inch, until her hands found the small body, shaking in fear. "Hold on to me. Don't let go," she whispered, wrapping the boy against her. At the rim, Cole and the men pulled with all they had. The rope groaned. Cole's palms burned raw, blood welling in the creases of his fingers. Still, he never faltered. Each tug hammered his heart harder until at last a child's head broke into the light, followed by the dirt-streaked form of Ayanna. The mother collapsed, clutching her boy in sobs. For a heartbeat, the crowd stood silent, staring at the Apache woman sprawled in the dirt, chest heaving, hands torn and bleeding. The silence was heavy, yet not only scorn. Something else flickered there. Surprise. Respect. The woman they despised had risked her life to save one of their own. For the first time, trust, fragile, trembling, sparked in the dust. By late afternoon, the sun stretched gold over storm-swept fields, the air still thick with dry grit. Ayanna sat on the porch, her hands swollen and raw from the rescue. The town was quiet in a new way. No open jeers, but eyes from afar, watching, weighing. Cole stepped out, setting a cup of water before her. They hadn't yet spoken when hoofbeats thundered close, heavy and deliberate. Sheriff Morgan. Tall and lean in the saddle, he greeted them with a nod, then pulled a worn sheaf of papers from his coat. The edges were frayed, the ink fading. He held it out to Cole, voice low and graveled. Homestead deed. The land behind your ranch is still open. If you want to shut the town's mouths, put her name on it too. No one can argue with the law. The yard went still. Ayanna stiffened, her dark eyes wide with shock. For her, land had long been nothing but a dream, something her people lost when soldiers and settlers swept through. And now, this thin sheet of paper promised the unthinkable: recognition. A rightful place. Cole took it, the weight heavy in his hands. He read each solemn line, feeling the gravity of it. Then he looked up at her. In his eyes, she saw hesitation, not born of fear, but of knowing this step would change everything. No longer silent protection, but a public vow. She is part of me. Ayanna shook her head faintly, voice barely steady. Cole, you don't have to. I'm only a guest beneath your roof. Cole's grip tightened on the pen, his face set like carved stone. No, this is your home, same as mine. He bent and signed. His name sprawled bold across the page. Then he handed the pen to her. Her fingers trembled, but at last she scrawled her own mark beside his. Clumsy, uneven, but for the first time in her life, it gave her a claim to the soil beneath her feet. Morgan tucked the paper back into his case, gave a short nod, and with a flick of reins, turned his horse. Dust swirled as he rode away, and in that moment, within the humble yard, no words were needed. Both Cole and Ayanna knew. The quiet bond between them had been carved into law, no longer hidden in silence, but declared before justice itself. If it were you, whose side would you take? Ayanna, the Apache woman, finally given a rightful place to stand. B. Cole Dawson, the cowboy who signed his name, binding their fates in the open. Or another choice? Drop a comment and let me know you're still riding with this story. The desert night lay still, broken only by crickets and the low hiss of wind over sand. Ayanna was gathering wood in the yard when hoofbeats shattered the silence. From the distance came torchlight, drunken laughter, the clink of bottles. 3 riders swayed in their saddles, shadows stretching long against Cole's fence. Their faces were flushed red with whiskey, eyes glassy but gleaming with mean intent. The leader, a broad brute with a scar carved down his cheek, spat in the dirt and slurred out, though his voice carried a blade's edge. Cole Dawson, heard you've been keeping an Apache in your house. Don't care what papers you got. This town won't stomach her kind. The other 2 roared with laughter. One shook a bottle loose in his fist. The other dropped his heavy hand to the grip of his gun, flashing it bold. Ayanna froze, clutching her bundle of wood tight. Her back straightened, pride burning in her gaze. She stepped toward the porch, not retreating in fear, but to stand firm beside Cole. Cole came out onto the porch, his shadow stretching across the sand. His hand rested light on his revolver, his voice low, ground hard against stone. You've said your piece, now turn your horses, go. The scarred man cackled, sharp and bitter. Go, we came to settle this. You keep her, you stand against the whole town. Don't think you can hide forever behind this fence. The air turned heavy. Ayanna moved closer, shoulder to shoulder with Cole. Sweat streaked her brow, her side still raw with pain, yet her head was high, her eyes fierce. Her voice cut the dark. If you want me, then step across. The scarred man's hand slid lower, close to his trigger. Cole's grip tightened on his gun, body coiled like a drawn bowstring. One wrong twitch, and blood would paint the gate. Then, another voice, low, rough, steady. That's enough. Sheriff Morgan rode in from the road, his tall frame casting long shadows over the 3 riders. His hand rested on his own pistol, eyes sharp as steel. He reined in at the gate, his voice even, each word heavy as a hammer. In this land, the man who draws first is the first one buried. You boys want to test it? The three froze. Silence pressed in tight. Scarface snarled, spat into the dust, then jerked his reins. With curses under their breath, the trio wheeled their horses and stumbled off into the dark, their torches fading to nothing. Morgan's gaze cut to Cole, stern, weighted. You've made your choice, and now the whole town knows it. Cole gave only a nod, hand easing off his gun. Ayanna stood tall at his side, her eyes blazing. Both knew Cole's choice was no longer private. It had become a public vow, witnessed by all. By morning, the town was abuzz. The standoff at Cole's gate was on every lip, men muttering outside the saloon, women whispering at the well. Everyone knew now Cole Dawson had stood at his fence, gun in hand, protecting the Apache woman he called his own. That act spoke louder than any words, forcing the town to face what could no longer be ignored. By afternoon, golden light stretched across the empty field as Pastor Green rode up to the ranch. The old preacher was gentle by nature, silver hair straggling beneath his broad-brim hat. He wasted no time. From his leather case he pulled a folded paper, voice slow but firm. Cole, Ayanna, if you want to silence the tongues, there's only one way. Marriage. A marriage will bind the land legal and give folks less cause to strike. Are you ready to sign? The yard fell quiet. Cole turned to Ayanna. She sat still, hands clenched tight, her eyes caught between fear and wonder. To her, marriage had never been a blessing, only a shackle, something her people were denied the freedom to choose. Yet as the pastor held out that paper, she knew this was the one chance to be truly recognized, not as a guest, but as part of this land. Cole stepped forward, his eyes blazing in the late light. Without pause, he seized the pen and signed clean across the page. Then he offered it to her. Her hand trembled, her heart pounding against her ribs. But at last, her awkward strokes marked beside his. A signature, not of skill, but of truth. Their fates bound as one. Pastor Green smiled gently, nodded, and added his attestation, pressing the seal in deep red. He folded the paper, though its weight seemed to linger in the air. From that moment, Cole and Ayanna were no longer two outcasts standing against whispers. They were husband and wife before the law, and the land, by paper and by heart, was theirs together. Word spread quick. At the saloon, brows furrowed. At the church, women whispered, doubtful yet shaken. But among those whispers came something else, an uneasy respect. Because now, Cole and Ayanna's bond was no rumor. It was truth, signed and sealed by law and faith. If it were you, whose side would you take? Oh, Ayanna, the Apache woman who, for the first time, signed her own name and claimed a home. B. Cole Dawson, the cowboy who defied a town, binding his fate openly with hers. Or would you choose another path? Drop a comment and let me know you're still riding with this story. Summer in the west came scorching, yet on a small plot of land at the edge of town, life was beginning to bloom. On the tilled rows, Ayanna knelt, her calloused hands carefully sowing kernels of corn. The old wound at her side still ached now and then, but she paid it no mind. Each seed dropped and covered with dust wasn't just a crop. It was a promise. For Ayanna, this wasn't only planting season. It was proof she had a rightful place on this land, same as anyone else. Nearby, Cole worked under the sun, shirt clinging with sweat. He drove stakes into the ground, tying bundles of dry brush to form a low windbreak to shield the soil. His motions were simple, repetitive, but each time his eyes drifted toward Ayanna, a strange peace washed over him. This house, this patch of earth, this woman, it was no longer a shelter of chance. It was a life. The town, after so many storms, was finally quieting. The whispers at the saloon grew fewer. When Ayana passed the well with a bucket in hand, eyes still followed her, but they lingered only a moment. Some even gave a small nod, and though no words were spoken, it was a shift greater than any shout. The old church well, where she'd once risked her life for a child, now stood repaired, capped strong. And for the townsfolk, each glance at it brought the same memory, the Apache woman who had traded her blood to save one of theirs. Hatred, little by little, was cracking. Ayana felt it too. Not welcome, not kinship, but no longer a curse. She could walk beside Cole at the market without fear of her goods being thrown to the dust. Her footing was fragile, but pride steadied her. She had walked from outcast to undeniable. Evenings came soft. They sat together on the porch, the wind sighing through the brush walls, cattle lowing in the distance, a rough symphony of new life. Cole rarely spoke, but now and then he'd mutter, short and sure, "Corn'll be tall soon." Ayana smiled, fingers twisting at her skirt, her gaze on the tender green rose. She knew he wasn't only speaking of harvest. He meant their life. Theirs. Together. Their days were no longer just survival. They had become a season of trust, of grit, and of love quietly taking root. One evening, the western sky blazed red as the cornfield rustled like green silk. Ayana sat sewing Cole's workshirt, each stitch steady and sure. From the kitchen drifted the scent of roasted corn and fresh coffee. The porch swing creaked softly. Cole came in from the yard, hands caked with dust, shoulders sagging with a day's labor. He set down his hammer, sat beside her. The moment was still, crickets in the grass, the hush of wind through the fence line. Cole's eyes wandered toward the gate, the very gate where she had once stood, frail, battered, proud against the town's hatred. He sat quiet a long time, then spoke low, every word heavy as stone. "Ayana, that day you knocked, I nearly didn't open." Her head lifted, surprise glinting, softening into tenderness. She laid the shirt aside, turned fully toward him. Cole dropped his gaze, fingers knotted tight. He went on. "I thought about walking away, afraid of trouble, of the town's eyes, of the past, piling more weight. But then I saw you, remembered the girl who once split a crust of bread with me by the creek, and I couldn't." The confession cracked something open, not to break, but to bind tighter. Ayana smiled faintly, rare and warm. She reached for his hands, her own weathered by fieldwork, pressing them into his. Her eyes shone, fierce yet gentle. Her voice came soft, but strong as any vow. "And now, you never will close it again." Cole tightened his grip. No long speeches, no need of witnesses or papers. That simple act, holding hands on a porch, gazing out over young green rows, was their eternal promise. The western sky deepened purple, stars pricking into silver. The little house stood firm against the harsh desert, its hearth glowing red. Two pairs of boots set side by side and two hearts beating steady as one. Out of blood and dust, out of desperate survival, they had built a home. And in the unforgiving West, that was love. Not loud, not adorned, but steady as the earth, as stone, as the wind that once tried to break them. From a gate that almost stayed shut, Cole and Ayana had opened a new journey together. A journey of trust, of sharing, and of love that endured storms and prejudice alike. They began in survival. They built a home. And in the end, they proved to the town and to themselves that true love can outlast judgment and dust storms both. It makes you wonder, sometimes one choice, whether to open a gate or leave it closed, can change a life forever. And you, What would you choose if you were in Cole's or Ayana's boots? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Thank y'all for riding along.